the not insignificant fact, even though the situation in Syria remains horrific.
We will leave the White House briefing at this point as the U.S. Senate is returning from their weekly party lunches. Lawmakers resuming work on whether to move forward with a bill that bars employers from discriminating against workers based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Now live to the Senate floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Vermont.
I don't know if there is a quorum called. No. Okay.
There is not.
Then I would just ask to be allowed to address the Senate for a brief period of time.
The senator is recognized.
I just wanted to touch this afternoon on two issues. And one is the issue of Social Security, which is life and death for many, many millions of Americans, as well as the issue of Medicare and Medicaid. And the main point that I want to make, and I make this as a member of the Budget Conference Committee, is the American people, regardless of their political persuasion, Democrat, Republican, independent, conservative, progressive, whatever, the American people are quite united in stating that they do not want cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and they do not believe that we should balance the budget on the backs of some of the most vulnerable people in this country. According to the latest National Journal United Technologies poll, 81% of the American people do not want to cut Medicare benefits at all. 76% of the American people do not want to cut Social Security benefits at all. 60% of the American people do not want to cut Medicaid benefits at all. And what the and this is just one of many polls that are out there, and what the American people understand is that millions of people are hurting in today's economy. Poverty, number of people living in poverty, an all-time high. Median family income going down. Unemployment much, much too high. People are hurting, and we cannot make devastating cuts on the social safety net, which is life and literally life and death for so many of our people. And I did want to mention, Madam Chair, that I worked on a petition drive with a number of grassroots organizations throughout this country, and they include Credo, Daily Kos, Campaign for America's Future, Social Security Works, Democracy for America, Progressives United, Move On, Other 98, U.S. Action, and the Alliance for Retired Americans. And within a pretty short period of time, less than a week, we have gotten over somewhere around 500,000 names on a petition which says very clearly, do not cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Do not balance the budget on the backs of some of the most vulnerable people in this country. And the other point that I would make when we talk about the budget is at the end of the day, people do believe that the deficit is too high, and we should be proud, by the way, in the last 4 years we've cut the deficit in half, but it is too high. But what the American people also say that is what is much more significant to them is the economy and the fact that we have so many people who are unemployed. And I would just point out, as somebody who believes very strongly, and I speak as a former mayor of Burlington, Vermont, who believes absolutely that when your infrastructure, your roads and your bridges and your rail system is in need of enormous investment, where we can create millions of decent-paying jobs, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, that what the American people are saying is, yeah, we have got to create jobs. And I would just point out that according to a March 3rd, 2013 Gallup poll, 75% of the American people, including 56% of Republicans, 74% of independents, and 93% of Democrats, support, and I quote, a federal jobs creation law that would spend government money for a program designed to create more than 1 million new jobs. So again, across, people say, well, we're divided in America. Well, you know what? In many ways, we're not quite so divided. American people say don't cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The American people say the most important issue facing our country is creating jobs. They want the federal government to do that. In this body, we are divided. But among the American people on many of these issues, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, they're not quite so divided. I would also point out that when we talk about unemployment, an area that does not get anywhere near the kind of discussion that we need is youth unemployment in America. And I will tell you, Madam Chair, that as horrendous as unemployment is for anybody of any age, it is so terrible for the young people who are graduating high school and graduating college. You know, what we say, all of us say to the young people in this country, don't stand on street corners, don't do drugs, go out and get a job, create a career, make it into the middle class. And yet, real unemployment for young people in this country, for youth in this country, is somewhere around 20%. 20%. Among African-American young people, it is over 40%. And I don't hear the discussion here in the Senate about the need to create the millions of jobs that our young people desperately need. So when they leave school, they can go out and create a career for themselves and make it into the middle class. And I worry very much about those young people who don't have that opportunity. I would point out, Madam Chair, that in an interview published on October 1st, 2013, Pope Francis said, and let me quote what the Pope said, "The most serious of the evils that afflict the world these days are youth unemployment and the loneliness of the old." And he's not, of course, just talking about America. He's talking about what's going on throughout the world. The old need care and companionship. The young need work and hope, but have neither one nor the other. And the problem is they don't even look for them anymore. And I couldn't agree more. We cannot turn our backs on the elderly. We cannot cut Social Security and Medicare. We cannot turn our backs on the young people. They need to be able to be given the opportunity to have decent jobs and make a life for themselves. Madam Chair, I also wanted to say a few words about a piece of legislation that just passed the Health, Education, and Labor Committee. I am the chairperson of the subcommittee on primary health care and aging. And I want to thank Chairman Harkin and Ranking Member Lamar Alexander, who were co-sponsors of the Older Americans Act legislation that just last week came out of committee. This is a bill that some of us have been working on for several years. The Older Americans Act is an enormously important piece of legislation for senior citizens all over this country. The bill that came out of committee in a very strong bipartisan way has the strong support of over 50 national organizations representing tens of millions of Americans, including AARP, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, the National Council on Aging, the Alzheimer's Association, and the Meals on Wheels Association of America. I won't go into all of what this bill does. I don't have the time to do that, but it deals with the issue, very important issue, of elder abuse and making sure that seniors in nursing homes get the care and respect that they are entitled to. It deals with a long-term care ombudsman program. It places an increased emphasis on evidence-based programs. It addresses the changing nature of senior centers in America, prevents fraud and abuse, focuses on home care and nutrition services. There's a lot in this bill that I think is quite good, and it's a step forward. Here is one of the problems that we have, and Senator Burr of North Carolina raised it, and appropriately so. The issue is that we are seeing in this country in general a migration of folks from northern parts of the country to the south. That's not a new issue, including many seniors. And what Senator Burr was arguing is that he thinks the current formula is unfair, that it does not take into account that kind of migration, and I think he has a valid point which we want to address. But here is the other point, and more important point, I think. Since 2006, the last year in which the Older Americans Act was reauthorized, the U.S. population over 60 has grown by 20%. As the baby boomers age, every single state in this country has seen their senior population grow. Yet, and here is the important point, federal funding for this legislation is the same today as it was in 2006. That's $1.8 billion. Funding for the Act in terms of real inflation accounted for dollars has decreased by more than $250 million during that period of time. So you have a growth in the senior population. You have a decline in real dollars going into the needs of seniors through the Older Americans Act, and this is a very, very serious problem. And you compound that problem with a migration from the north to some states in the south. What's the solution? Well, I think the solution is pretty simple. If we understand that the Older Americans Act is an enormously cost-effective act, you don't need to be a gerontologist or a physician who deals with senior citizens to understand that when a senior is malnourished, doesn't get the nutrition that he or she needs, that senior is more likely to break a hip by falling, that senior is more likely to get sick, end up in the emergency room, end up at the hospital at great cost. Everybody knows, no debate about this, that when seniors have the companionship, when they have the nutrition that they need, they are less likely to end up in the emergency room, they're less likely to end up in the hospital, and we can save money. Study after study shows that investing in programs like the Older Americans Act, and that is the Meals on Wheels program, the congregate meal program, employment opportunities for seniors, dealing with elder abuse. When you invest in those programs, you save money. You not only, from a moral perspective, make life better for seniors, you actually save federal money by preventing other bad things from happening. So I would hope that our committee and members of the Senate can work together to say that increasing funding for the Older Americans Act is not only the right thing to do for millions of Americans, it is also, in fact, the cost-effective way to go. And I think if we can increase funding, we can deal with some of the issues that Senator Byrd has raised. What I will not support is making drastic cuts in certain states like Iowa, New York, or Massachusetts in order to increase funding in other states. What we have to do is protect every state in this country, because there is no state where programs like the Meals on Wheels program do not already have long waiting lines. So what we need to do is invest in these programs, and when we do that, I think we will have done a very, very important thing for seniors all over this country. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
The senator from Nebraska.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as in morning business for 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you. I come to the floor today to talk about the health care law. We've reached the one-month milestone of the embarrassing rollout of healthcare.gov, and it still doesn't work. And there is no shortage of headlines about the issues. CNBC, 99% of Obamacare applications hit a wall. Bloomberg, insurers getting faulty data from U.S. health exchanges. Consumer Reports, stay away from healthcare.gov for at least another month if you can. Forbes, now she tells us. Sibilia says Obamacare's exchange website needed 6 years of development instead of 2. The Associated Press, government memo shows a lack of testing posed a high security risk. Nebraskans have relayed the same frustrating messages to me and to my office. One Nebraskan from Ogallala shared that she was on the website from 9 a.m. until 3 p.m. and was not able to set up an account. She said after 6 hours the website screen read, quote, "The account couldn't be created at this time," unquote. Another Nebraskan from Norfolk said he couldn't get the website to work, so he contacted a website official who actually said he could not help him. Instead, the official directed him back to the non-working website. The accounts from people who have experienced page crashes, hours and hours of slow service, no service, and information errors goes on and on and on. Yesterday, I launched a page on my website for Nebraskans to share their Obamacare stories. In just the first 24 hours, nearly all of the stories I have received are heart-wrenching accounts about the law's negative impact. Despite the headlines and stories flooding in across the country, the President continues his all-too-familiar cheerleading act. Rather than offering Americans the accountability and the transparency they deserve, the President claims, and I'm quoting, "The product is working. It's really good," unquote. Top HHS officials reflected the President's poor leadership in their hearings today and last week. They dodged questions, they withheld critical information, and delivered more promises that won't be kept. Strikingly, the Obamacare enrollment site was actually down as the HHS Secretary testified for the first time about the website's troubled rollout and even assured Americans the website is working. It's just slow and unreliable. Americans are understandably frustrated with this failed effort and, most importantly, this failed law. Last week, I co-sponsored legislation that requires HHS to provide weekly reports to Congress and to the public about healthcare.gov. This ensures Americans who have paid over $400 million for this exchange actually receive the transparency that they deserve. While enacting this bill is one worthwhile step, the issues with this law aren't just about the website. The reality is there are much larger issues that no fix to the website can solve. Not surprisingly, the law's botched implementation is mimicking the clumsy passage. I was here. I saw it. 2,700 pages, written behind closed doors, passed on party line votes, full of unrealistic promises, and filled with pork. It indeed has been a recipe for disaster since day one. We received clear warnings in 2009 that a lack of transparency, missed deadlines, and broken promises were to be the legacy of this law. And now, for almost 4 years, we are seeing just the start of the real-life consequences of this irresponsible process and policy. A number of stories I've heard from Nebraskans reflect what's happening on a large-scale basis across this great country. A widowed mother from Kearney. She pays for her family's health insurance out of her own wages. She's extremely disappointed because her existing plan won't be offered next year. The President's repeated promise to her and to others, quote, "If you like your plan, you can keep it," unquote. Well, it's not true for that mother in Kearney or for millions of Americans. So this Nebraskan is stuck with two options. She can choose a plan with a similar premium, but her coinsurance will go up, her deductible will increase to $1,500, and her family out-of-pocket limit will increase to $9,700. Her second option is to select a plan with similar coverage that costs an additional $200 per month. That's $2,400 more a year. She said in her letter, and I'm quoting, "I don't find this to be affordable health care. I had affordable health care," unquote. This woman is not alone. According to figures released by the Nebraska Department of Insurance about the exchange in our state, Nebraska Insurance Director said, quote, "Basically the rates are going up," unquote. Family coverage for a single mom with 3 children in Hastings, Nebraska will increase 21%. A single male in Lincoln will see a 144% increase. Let me repeat that, 144% increase. A Manhattan Institute study found that Nebraska would be one of the worst hit states for rate hikes, specifically citing young males and middle-aged women. A practicing physician in Nebraska wrote to me saying Obamacare will, quote, destroy, unquote, our health care system. She says the law means more paperwork, less time with patients, doctors outright quitting their practice or retiring early, and fewer students willing to invest time and money to become doctors, unquote. This fall, Nebraska grocers came to my office to discuss Obamacare. They shared that small grocery stores are hiring fewer people and they're cutting back hours. As we all know, the employer mandate requires businesses with over 50 employees to provide coverage for all of their employees or pay a $2,000 penalty for each employee. Even though the mandate was delayed, grocers shared, quote, the labor force is fundamentally changing already, unquote, and I might add, not for the better. I find it amazingly contradictory that the Obama administration is granting a delay that provides private businesses temporary relief from an employer mandate, yet American families will be subject to the individual mandate. It is even more inconsistent and unfair to punish American families by imposing a penalty for not enrolling on a website that isn't working. Last week, I signed on to legislation to delay the individual mandate until 6 months after the website is verifiably fixed. I've also signed on to a bill that delays the mandate for a year and another bill that would repeal it entirely. I firmly oppose the mandate. I hope to repeal it, but at the very least, I believe Americans should have the same protection that our nation's businesses have been promised. Because the reality is, this law has put good-willed and hardworking Americans who are playing by the rules in the most frustrating and heartbreaking situations. When it comes to this law, I've already said I believe the people of Nebraska and the citizens of our great country deserve so much better. Well, they deserve a law that addresses the rising cost of care. They deserve a government that fosters economic growth so that families can confidently make a down payment on a house, send their kids to college, grow their businesses, or start a new one. Instead, because of their government, Americans are more uncertain than ever. They simply can't make sense of the 2,700-page law or its 20,000 pages of regulations and what that means for their families. You'd need a cadre of lawyers to figure that out. The administration's failed website launch only deepens Americans' concern about what more could come. Obamacare was never ready for prime time. It wasn't that Christmas Eve when it was passed on a pure party line vote. Sadly, we all knew this when it passed, but now we're beginning to see that you reap what you sow. So today we find ourselves at a crossroads. And it's time to listen to the American people and repeal the law which would deliver the single biggest solution to removing the uncertainty, anxiety, and burden upon our economy. History will harshly judge those who defend, for political reasons, a law that is so clearly inflicting so much harm. Now, lately, a few of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle have begun to admit the problems and admit that they're real and substantial. There is tremendous pressure on them not to break ranks, yet several are beginning to speak for the people instead of the party. Some are rightly beginning to refuse to defend promises that have now proven to be lies. Most importantly, some are now signaling a willingness to support legislative solutions. Maybe there is a crack in the armor, but we need more than the current few to stand up with the American people. We need 15 Democrats to join our 45 Republican senators to actually repeal or amend any section of this ill-advised law. It's a worthwhile endeavor, and it's one we must pursue. I believe ultimately that history will commend those who rise above the political fray, to recognize that at this moment in time, true statesmen, true public servants must stand with the American people. Madam President, I yield the floor. I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And throughout the day, speeches on the Senate floor on the Employee Non-Discrimination Act, which would ban workplace discrimination against gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered persons. They are in a quorum call, and during this quorum call, we're going to show you the comments of the bill's main sponsor, Senator Merkley of Oregon.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon.
President, I appreciate the comments my colleague from Maryland, who has argued so well that the time has come to take a bold step in favor of equality, in favor of fairness, and pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. I, too, rise to speak to the importance of this action. The Declaration of Independence, in its second paragraph, says, in words that are famous and well known to all Americans, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Certainly, that vision of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is infused into everything we pursue in this nation for the success of individuals and the success of our families and the success of our communities and the success of our nation. And the debate on which we are about to embark is deeply connected to this debate, because certainly the ability to be free from discrimination in the pursuit of a job and to be free from discrimination in the course of employment is central to that pursuit of happiness. It is central to the issue of liberty. I rise today to say how important and vital this is to millions of Americans for whom discrimination has blocked and compromised the vision laid out in the Declaration of Independence. And this bill, this framework for ending discrimination in employment, Senate Bill 815, is born with a lot of bipartisan partners whom I'd like to thank at this moment. It was back in 2009, my first year in the U.S. Senate, that Senator Kennedy and his team asked me to take leadership of this bill that he had held near and dear to his heart, to carry the torch forward in fighting for fairness in employment, fighting for an end to discrimination. And since that time, many have stepped forward to be partners in this journey. Senator Collins was the first chief co-sponsor from the Republican side, stepping forward and taking her voice and her energy and her experience and her insight to bear. And after 2 years, she passed the baton to Senator Mark Kirk, who has been a longtime champion of the vision of fairness and equality for all Americans. Both of them have done an outstanding and extraordinary job in forwarding this dialogue. And on the Democratic side, we have first and foremost Senator Kennedy, who carried this leadership for many years, including back in 1996 when we had this on the floor of the Senate. And I'll return to that in due course. He's a champion for civil rights in many, many different parts of our world, including race discrimination and gender discrimination and discrimination against the LGBT community. And Senator Harkin, who chairs the Health, Education, and Labor Committee that carried this bill forward through two hearings in 2009 and 2012, who carried it forward in the markup this last year and who'd prepared to send it to the floor. Thank you, Senator Harkin, for your leadership. And Senator Tammy Baldwin, who came to us with her personal story, who came to us with her experience of leadership from the House to extend the conversation here in the Senate, and has carried on so many individual meetings to speak to these core issues of equality and fairness and opportunity. So thank you to this bipartisan set of sponsors, and thank you to everyone who last night said, yes, we should debate this issue. We should debate this issue of discrimination blocking full opportunity for millions of Americans. And so shortly we will be engaged in that debate. After the Declaration of Independence, we had the preamble to the Constitution. And this also is well known to Americans across the land. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America. So here we have those core concepts of justice and the blessings of liberty for that generation, the generations that would follow. What exactly is liberty? What is freedom? Senator Kennedy, in 1965, in a commencement address to Howard University, said, "Freedom is the right to share fully and equally in American society, to vote, to hold a job, to enter a public place, to go to a school." Senator Johnson continued, "It is the right to be treated in every, President Johnson continued, "It is the right to be treated in every part of our national life as a person equal in dignity and promise to all others." I think it's a pretty good description of what liberty and freedom means, a right to participate fully in American society in every respect, at the voting booth, in the job place, and in the public square as you would choose to participate. So the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which ends discrimination against our LGBT community, is rooted in the best of American values. It's rooted in the concepts of liberty and freedom in our founding documents and our founding vision. It's rooted in the concept of fundamental fairness. How unfair is it if an individual who is seeking to apply to a job cannot have a full opportunity for that job, a full opportunity to thrive because of discrimination? How fair is it, because of who you are outside of the workplace, that you are fired from the workplace? Let us think of the golden rule. We all learned this early in life, that we should treat others according to how we would want to be treated. And we would all want to be treated with respect and dignity that President Johnson referred to. It is a vision of equality that was in the Declaration of Independence, and it's the vision of opportunity that's rooted so deeply in the American dream. The idea that in America, if you work and study hard, you can do just about anything. No, that's a vision my father gave to me when he took me to the schoolhouse doors when I was small, and he said, if you go through those doors and you study hard here in America, you can do just about anything. But discrimination takes away from that vision of opportunity. It says, if you study hard here in America, you can do just about anything unless you have a certain color of skin, unless you have a certain gender, unless you have a certain gender identity or sexual orientation. Now, we've struck down many of those barriers. We've advanced on this vision of equality, but we have further to go. That's what this debate is about. In 29 states, you can still be fired from the job. You can still be told not to apply in the beginning because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity. In 29 states. It should not be the case that the vision of equality and fairness and opportunity happens to occur on one side of a state line, but is destroyed if you cross that state line. Because this vision of opportunity and fairness and equality that's in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence didn't say that this vision is only if you live in particular states, only if you live in the 21 states that have protections for our lesbian, gay, and bisexual community, or only if you live in the 17 states that have protections of employment for our transgender community. The journey of this legislation began in 1974. It was a year after Stonewall, 39 years ago. Bella Abzug and Ed Koch introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives legislation that would ban job discrimination. And it took another 19 years before such legislation was introduced here in the U.S. Senate. And hearings were held in the Labor and Human Resources Committee in 1994. And it was 2 years later that the bill was debated here on this chamber, right here, in this very room. And the outcome was 49 for, 50 against, with Vice President Gore sitting right now in the presiding chair where the senator from Hawaii sits. Now, Vice President Gore had already clarified where he stood. So we were missing one senator and one vote. And the result is it's been 17 years since this conversation was held in this chamber. 17 years of discrimination through so many states across America. It's time to end that discrimination and enhance the vision of equality and fairness. Well, today we have a bill that has before us 55 co-sponsors. Now, when we think about that 49-50 vote 17 years ago, we might say, well, isn't this a done deal? There are 55 co-sponsors. You only need 51 or 50 plus the Vice President to pass a bill in the U.S. Senate. But it's not a done deal because in the last decade and a half, the Senate has gone from being a simple majority chamber as envisioned in the Constitution to being a chamber where every action takes a supermajority vote. We needed a supermajority of 60 to get on to the bill last night, and everyone anticipates we'll need 60 votes to get off the bill, that is, to close debate and have a final vote. That's not the Senate that's been with us through 200 years. It's the Senate of the last 10 years, where the courtesy of extended debate has been turned into the veto of a supermajority. But that is where we stand right now, and therefore we need 60 votes. And we had 61 votes last night to get onto this debate, and I thank every one of those 61 senators who stood up and said, yes, after 17 years, it's time to debate this issue. Yes, it is right to consider issue of core fairness to millions of Americans. Yes, it is right to recognize that we should have a debate about the impact of discrimination on the ability of the individual to have full opportunity in our nation. So thank you to the 61 senators who stood up last night. Have no doubt, discrimination is alive and well. I'll share with you a story of Laura from Portland, Oregon. Before Oregon had non-discrimination clauses, which we adopted in 2007. And she notes that from 1980 to 1996, she worked for the Josephine County Sheriff's Office in Grants Pass, Oregon. She had the rank of sergeant. She was promoted often. She worked as a variety of capacities, including as a SWAT team commander, as a detective in the Major Crimes Unit, and in the Narcotics Task Force. During her 16 years, she notes, she says, I received numerous commendations, including commendations for removing an automobile accident victim from a burning vehicle, delivering a baby alongside a roadside, disarming an armed man intent on harming himself. She was awarded for her expertise and diligence shown in a number of complicated criminal cases. She was named Deputy of the Year in 1994. She taught law enforcement classes at Royal Community College and at the Oregon Police Academy. She had a distinguished employment record. But then, on Labor Day 1995, she was in a remote area when a police dog attacked her and did some damage to her leg, and she was put on administrative leave. And during the month that followed, her storage unit was broken into. And out of the storage unit came information that she was a transgender individual. And because of that, she was fired. Stellar career in every aspect. But a break into her storage unit plus discrimination ended that career. She ends her commentary by saying, had employment non-discrimination laws been in effect, I likely would have continued serving the citizens of Josephine County to this day. And we know from her employment record that she would have been well served. But that was before Oregon adopted anti-discrimination legislation. Many people have written to share their stories. Terry from Aloha wrote, thank you for continuing the fight against discrimination. I am retired now, but I did lose a job when I was young for being a lesbian. Until later in life, I stayed deep in the closet to keep from losing another job. All of the non-discrimination bills help us define who we are as a people, she continues, and underscores our belief in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for every American. By one survey, far more than a third of individuals, LGBT individuals, have experienced some form of harassment or discrimination in the workplace. That's a tremendous impact on the pursuit of happiness. That's a tremendous shrinking of freedom and liberty as envisioned in our founding documents, our vision for this nation. Now, there are a number of issues that have been raised as colleagues have talked about this bill before it comes to the floor here, and I wanted to address some of them. First, this bill is fully inclusive. It includes the lesbian, the gay, the bisexual, and the transgender community. It should be fully inclusive because discrimination is wrong. Discrimination shrinks opportunity. Discrimination is an offense against liberty and freedom in our nation, the full participation in society. So of course this bill should be fully inclusive, as it is in 17 of the 21 states that have laws in their books right now. A second issue has been concern about lawsuits. And we heard this yesterday from the Speaker of the House. But we have all of these pilots, if you will, 21 states with measures on the books, all kinds of experience. So I asked the General Accounting Office to do an updated study of the issue of lawsuits. And what do we find out? There's been no abuse. There's been no extraordinary stream of unfounded lawsuits against businesses, no damage to business. None at all. In Oregon, LGBT discrimination claims are less than 2% of the total number of employment discrimination claims. It's less than 1 out of 50. In other states, it's ranged from 2 to 6%. That's a small number. And it's why the business community has remained so supportive. Far more than half, in fact, close to 90% of the Fortune 500 companies have non-discrimination practices that they have adopted on their own. They have adopted it because it's good business. Nike, in my home state of Oregon, says, quote, ENDA is good for business, for our employees, and for our communities. Continues the Nike statement to say that inclusive non-discrimination policies, quote, enable us to attract and retain the best and brightest people around the world. That's why Fortune 500 companies have lined up to adopt non-discrimination provisions. Because what is good for liberty, what is good for opportunity, is good for business. And the GAO study shows that any claim that there has been a problem with excessive lawsuits is simply false. A third concern is about the religious exemption. The religious exemption in this bill is deeply founded on Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So there's a whole history of interpretation and understanding exactly where the boundaries are. This is the same religious exemption that was voted in favor of in the U.S. House of Representatives by a measure of 420 to 25. 420 to 25 said this is the right foundation to make sure that we create the balance for religious organization. There are others who are concerned that simply the American people are not ready for this discussion, despite the fact that it's been adopted in 21 states, despite the fact that we've had many related issues before the American public up for discussion, including hate crimes, the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Act. We've had Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We've had a Supreme Court discussion about marriage equality. Certainly the Americans are well familiar with this. In fact, 80% of Americans think we've already done this. I was explaining to my daughter, Bryn, about this bill, this fight against discrimination and its terrible impacts on liberty and freedom and opportunity. And she said, but Dad, people can't fire others because they're lesbian or gay, right? She said, that's not possible. And I said, sweetie, It was possible right here in Oregon until a couple years ago, when in 2007 we adopted non-discrimination policies, non-discrimination statutes for our state. And she just shook her head. And it took me back to when I was in high school, and I was hearing about Jim Crow systems of discrimination against those with dark skin instead of lighter skin. And I thought, that's not possible. Not under our vision of opportunity and equality of our Constitution and our pursuit of happiness. It's not possible. But it was possible, and it was very real well after I was born. But we ended that discrimination, and it's time to end this discrimination. This is about the individual, but it's about our nation as well. It's certainly about the vision of the Declaration of Independence that has the promise of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness as the founding motivation. It certainly is about our Constitution that says the core purpose is to secure the blessings of liberty. Because certainly you do not have liberty if you do not have the full opportunity to participate in the workplace across America. Senator Ted Kennedy, who carried this battle until days before his death. In fact, the quote I'm about to share is from August 5th, 2009. He died just 20 days later. This may well have been one of his last public comments. And introducing the 2009 bill may well have been one of his last legislative acts. And he said, "The promise of America will never be fulfilled as long as justice is denied to even one among us." I urge my colleagues, take a stand for equality. Take a stand for fundamental fairness. Take a stand for the vision of the pursuit of happiness embedded in our Constitution. Take a stand for justice for all. Support this bill.
The pending business in the Senate is a non-discrimination bill for LGBT employees. President Obama in the Hill saying that Monday's 61-30 vote on advancing the bill as a return to common sense during a dinner for top organizing for action donors. The bill, which would forbid employers from firing workers based on sexual orientation and gender identity, garnered 7 Republican supporters in a procedural vote to move toward final passage. We spoke with someone about the bill on this morning's Washington Journal.
Brian Moulton of the Human Rights Campaign. He's their Policy and Political Legal Affairs Director. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit of what the acronym, the vote on yesterday on what the bill that was known as ENDA. What is it? Why is it important?
Sure. So the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, the bill that passed the first procedural hurdle in the Senate last night, is really a very simple piece of legislation. It would add sexual orientation and gender identity to federal law prohibiting discrimination in employment alongside categories like race, sex, disability, et cetera. And that's really important because, unfortunately, despite all the advances we've seen for LGBT people all over the country in terms of marriage and in other areas, employment discrimination, is still very much a reality. And it's still perfectly legal in many states. In fact, in 21 states to fire someone or deny them a promotion because they're gay, or in 33 states, there's no state law to protect people who are transgender in employment. So still a very significant issue facing our community, and there really needs to be a national solution to address that problem.
How many times has this kind of vote come up in the past?
So the bill has been considered once before in the Senate, 17 years ago, in 1996, where it failed by 1 vote. We saw a version of the bill pass through the House of Representatives in 2007, but it didn't move any further than that. So we certainly have seen this issue in front of Congress for some time now, and we're very excited to see the progress we've had already in the Senate this year.
Why the need for expansion of current law?
Well, there is no law that prohibits discrimination on the federal level, clearly based on sexual orientation or gender identity. And as a result, in many places in this country, LGBT people are still facing employment discrimination based on who they are and not based on what their merits are or how well they're doing their job, but on something that's really unrelated to any of that. And that's something that we need to change. And we already have a great model for how to address that sort of unfair treatment in the workplace under federal law for a number of other categories, and this is really just the natural extension of those protections.
How many specific cases have you heard about that dealt with discrimination, especially on this topic?
Well, we hear from people, from our members and from members of the community frequently about experiencing workplace discrimination, and we certainly have seen many cases come up in the courts where people have tried to argue under existing sex discrimination law, under federal sex discrimination law, that they should be protected because of their sexual orientation. Those cases, unfortunately, are not successful because courts say, no, that's not what Congress intended when they enacted that law. There aren't protections for sexual orientation under federal law. So we know this is happening and that people are seeking recourse. But we also know that, in many cases, courts simply just don't have the legal ability to help them.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking a number of my colleagues for their leadership, Senators Merkley and Harkin and others in this body who have championed the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, known as ENDA, over many years with great passion and constancy. And now we are literally on the verge of approving this historic measure in this body and hopefully in the House of Representatives. I've heard from numerous organizations that represent America's workforce, the Service Employees International Union and the United Auto Workers Union, and I'm quoting the UAW. This legislation represents a step in the right direction toward providing equal opportunity for all Americans. That message is also carried by America's faith leaders, our business community generally, and many others who have fought over the years for civil rights and civil liberties. It is one of the paramount civil rights issues of our time, and I'm proud to be fighting for it. I'd like to mention some of the American businesses that have stepped forward to endorse this legislation. Behringer, Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals of Ridgefield, Connecticut, Diageo North America of Norwalk, Connecticut, UBS AG of Stamford, Connecticut, Xerox Corporation, also of Stamford Corporation. There are many others around Connecticut, big and small. The reason why the business community is steadfastly and strongly behind this bill is that it is good for America's working men and women. It's good for the business community. It has attracted bipartisan support in this body and around the nation. And America is moving toward this kind of guarantee against discrimination. This bill is many, many years in the making. And the last time the Senate voted on this issue in 1995, the bill couldn't even attain 50 votes. Our nation has made tremendous progress since then. Of course, not only on this bill, but on a range of LGBT civil rights issues. And this bill is important because it is inclusive. And inclusive is the word that ought to characterize our society. In the 18 years since the Senate last voted on ENDA, 14 states, which together are home to almost a third of the nation's population, have come to recognize same-sex marriage. This is, of course, an increase from zero in 1995. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen a string of landmark Supreme Court cases from Romer v. Evans to Lawrence versus Texas to this year's hugely important and inspirational ruling in Windsor versus United States. But this issue is about more than just legal reasoning and rulings. It's about real people. It is about members, millions of them, of the LGBT community who are now just beginning to enjoy the full freedom and equality that is guaranteed to them by our Constitution as citizens. And it's about their moms and dads, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, members of their families from all over, as well as their co-workers in the places where discrimination will be banned and who are supporting this legislation. They deserve nothing less than full equality, which is what this bill would give to them. They should not be victims of discrimination because of who they love. That's the simple principle behind this historic potential law. And still, on this bill, we have a lot more work to do. The House certainly will not be an easy battle, and we need to make sure, very simply, that the House is given an opportunity to vote, because if it is given that opportunity, if the House votes, it will approve this bill, just as it did the Violence Against Women Act, after initially the Speaker denied it that opportunity. The last time this bill came to a vote in the House in 2007, 35 Republicans joined Democrats to pass the bill, but it did not pass the Senate. I understand that Speaker Boehner may have reservations. He has expressed them already, and I understand that the politics for other members may be difficult. But this vote is about the future of our nation, about what kind of America we are going to be. It transcends in importance a lot of the measures that we do here. And it is about real people's lives in the workplace, in their homes, what kind of quality of life they have, what kind of opportunities they have to fulfill all of their potential as human beings. And that is why America is so special. It guarantees people an equal opportunity. In 29 states, LGBT Americans live without any protections against discrimination in private sector employment. They have those protections in 21 states across the country. But between 15 and 43% of all LGBT Americans have experienced discrimination or harassment in their workplaces because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, and that number rises to a staggering 90% for transgendered Americans in particular, with more than a quarter, 25%, reporting they've been fired. These kinds of troubling statistics have no place in America of the 21st century. We have an opportunity in this same bill to ban discrimination against our veterans. And I would suggest, and I will propose it in an amendment, that similar protections be afforded to them. Hiring a veteran is a good investment for any business. Veterans have unique qualities, including dedication and discipline, which make them qualified for many civilian jobs. But unfortunately, too many veterans are unable to find work today. Most especially are younger veterans who experience higher unemployment rates than their contemporaries, who have not made the sacrifice and not given the service that they have in uniform. And for them to be unemployed at higher rates is a disgrace. It is an outrage that the greatest nation in the history of the world, whose citizens volunteer to serve and sacrifice, preserving our freedom, have higher unemployment rates when they come home than others. And the evidence is, and I've heard it and seen it from veterans as well as others, that they are sometimes victims of discrimination. That ought to be outlawed. And that's what I believe this law can do, in addition to seeking equality and opportunity for all Americans and banning discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. I want to speak also in gratitude to AMVETS, Veterans of Foreign Wars, the National Guard Association of the United States, which have supported this initiative prohibiting discrimination against veterans. When I introduced S-1281, the Veterans and Service Members Employment Rights and Housing Act of 2013, they supported it, and I am grateful to them. I think this kind of amendment would be a welcome companion to landmark legislation, ENDA, that the Senate is moving forward toward passing. And when it comes to the workplace, on a separate, unrelated piece of legislation, and I ask if there is unanimous consent that it be reprinted separately from what I have just commented on, if there's no objection.
Without objection.
I want to thank Senator Coons for his leadership in the manufacturing initiative area that he has spearheaded. And